I'm Mike Costello, and I'm here with Dr. Iris Freelander, and today we'd like to talk to you about reducing your life obstacles through peace. And of course, all of us would like to reduce the obstacles in our lives, and we'd all like to have a great deal of more peace in our lives. So I think that the next 30 minutes will be enlightening and fun for both of us as well as our viewers. Obstacles. All of us have obstacles in our lives, don't we, Iris?
Well, we certainly do. And sometimes the obstacles that we think are most formidable are not really obstacles at all. They're steps for something new and different in our lives, because life is change, and we have to have different things happening, or we don't have change happening, and we don't have movement, and we don't have progress. And so we can remember that sometimes when we think it's an obstacle, it's a stepping stone.
Yeah, and in New Thought, so often we talk about seeing beyond the appearances, and we spend a lot of time in our lectures and writings and talking to people, encouraging them to see beyond appearances. And we do need to see beyond the apparent obstacles of life to the reality of divine order. And you and I know so well that there is divine order in the midst of every obstacle of life. But as you said so well, it is the obstacles and the changes and the challenges that bring us exactly what we need in life so often. And as painful as that is, often we get the same changes and the same challenges and the same obstacles until we really get good at being able to remove them. And that's part of what life is about. That's part of the growth process of this wonderful and magnificent experience.
Yes, and we can just think, I'll make it an adventure. And if we make life an adventure and think of it in that light, then the changes aren't that hard to accept. And we're more attuned to whatever is happening. And when we fight whatever it is that's happening, if we resist it, then it seems that much more formidable, and it brings greater negativity into our lives. But that same principle applies to pain. When we're feeling pain in our bodies, if we resist that pain, it's ever more intense. But if we relax and breathe deeply and just flow with it, and that's, if for someone who's never tried that might think, well, that's really ridiculous, but it isn't. And I would just encourage everyone to remember that when they're experiencing pain. And I first realized that not through reading or hearing someone else say it, but I had a toothache that was quite severe, and I realized, and there was a clock in the room where I was sleeping, and it would go off. I was sleeping in the den, and the clock would make the bells sound every 15 minutes, every half hour, and every hour. And so I realized that this pain, intense pain I was feeling, was occurring at a specific regularity. And just by breathing deeply and flowing with it, the pain was so much less. And as a hospice volunteer, I saw that was true with so many people who were experiencing pain. And if they would just relax and breathe deeply, and of course we would teach them to do that, and some would do it quite well, and some resisted the new idea. But we can look, when we're having a problem and facing an obstacle, just look to see what route we can take and what we can do differently. And our inner guidance will tell us. Someone else doesn't have to. And then try that, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Our inner guidance will always direct us to that which we need most if we'll just open ourselves to it. Mm-hmm. And the flowing with pain and with challenge and with difficulty, and certainly you and I have known and worked with enough people who are in the physical pain area of life, whether it's a terminal illness or whether it's someone that is going through a medical problem or procedure or challenge. And we know that through techniques that you just shared so well, that the pain can indeed, or the impact of the pain can be lessened. But emotional pain works the same way, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
And also, the other thing that happens, I think, as we embrace this concept of peace to deal with the obstacles or the difficulties of life, it is to focus our attention on something else. Just as you focused, you saw that your pain was cyclical, you also focus somewhat on the chimes of
Yes.
the bells in the clock, or we've helped a lot of people with guided imagery and others in the helping professions in psychology and sociology, and the ministry have done the same. And as we focus our minds on something else other than the obstacle, then we begin to have a form of clarity that we wouldn't have had before. And with that clarity comes a diminishment of the hurtfulness of the experience. And yet the other side of it is, if we want to hold on to it, we can hold on to it. I always tell the story, you've heard me so often tell the story about counseling people post-divorce or after divorce, and how many people want to tell you all about that divorce forever. And that's not to minimize the pain of divorce and separation and the end of relationships, because they're very painful and very meaningful to people. But there are times when we need to just get on with life, and we need to, with the help of others or ourselves, through working through the process, we need to let go of the obstacle, grab hold of the peaceful place. And one of the very successful techniques of doing that is to focus on something else. And that brings peace in the door. And as peace comes in the door, the obstacle diminishes. There's nothing, it's not rocket science. It sounds like it, but, and yet, so many people find it hard to do. And of course, what happens is the more we teach this technique and the more that we do it ourselves, the better at it that we become, so that we can access this technique to deal with the obstacles in life, because the obstacles are coming.
Yes.
And I will never, ever be faulted for telling people that obstacles and difficulties and challenges are not going to come, nor will I be faulted for telling people that they oughtn't to feel the way they feel. So I think that we certainly need to feel what we feel. If we're sad, we're sad. If we're mad, we're mad. If we're glad, we're glad. Whatever we are, we are. But we also, if it is an obstacle in life, can go through that experience. We can ride it out. We can experience it. And when we're ready to let go of it, we can move on to a peaceful place.
Yes, and some people in certain churches say, well, they gave their problem over to God. It's the same idea, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It is. But there's another concept of that I think is really important, and that is to give it to God, but then give it to God or give it to the divine, or whatever name we choose to use in our religious background and our tradition, and then be open to be guided and directed to do our part. So often people want to give it over to God, and all the bad things are the will of God, and we can get into that concept and that idea, and we want to understand completely that the will of God and the will of the divine for all of us is good and only good. And so as we give these things over, and as we give them to God, and that's certainly a good principle and a good mechanism, but then there's work to be done, and we need to do the work. We can't just give it over and then believe that the healing will be instantaneous, although sometimes it can be, if we detach from it and we move on to that peaceful place. And that, of course, is a place of reconciliation and a place of newness of life that can come to us. But most of us have to work through the process.
We have to, and also we have to, as you said, detach from it, because some people think they're giving it to God, but then they tell God what to do about it and so forth. So they have to truly give it up. And regardless of how they're releasing, it's just a matter of releasing whatever it is to the infinite letting and getting on, moving beyond it. And I think one of the most serious problems people seem to have is not being able to sleep at night when they're going through problems. And that is I think that must be quite a scourge to not be able to sleep at night, because then I don't know how people can function during the day, and usually they don't function all that well. But there's one thing about getting to sleep is if just they will hear a noise and then let it be very annoying. Well, just go with that noise. Just flow with it, and don't resist the noise. And anyone who's listening who has trouble sleeping at night, it seems so many people more and more do have that problem. Just try that. Try not resisting and just flowing with it. And sometimes it can be a fun exercise just to see. And before you know it, you're asleep before you know it. Mm-hmm. And to pray for others and to pray sincerely, but for specific individuals. Pray for all mankind throughout the world, but that we be united in universal love, but also to pray for individuals. And it's to be outside ourselves, and we're leaving behind the problem that's facing us, whatever's keeping our mind churning, then we're leaving that behind. That's what happens, isn't it?
Absolutely. The old technique of counting sheep. It's not bad. It's not a bad one at all. Yeah, not very divine, but it is refocusing. And of course, that technique is about taking quieting our minds. Sheep, of course, are pleasant and pastoral, and although most of us don't relate well to sheep anymore, I think probably 100 years ago we related to sheep and pastors better than we do today. But the idea and the concept that you just shared is really tremendously important, and that is that we do need to detach, and if we are having trouble sleeping, then that is certainly a technique that is useful, and not to focus upon the annoyances and the demands. And then the other thing not to focus upon is the fears.
Yes.
And to let go of the fears and the what ifs, because we can lay awake at night all night worrying about what if.
Exactly, and that often happens. There's a young couple who was staying at my house before they bought their second house, and they were hearing every noise and being annoyed by it. And and they didn't realize it's because they were in limbo with their living conditions. So we have to realize what's causing our problems and then releasing it.
And as we realize that and we get into the way that our minds operate, then life, our minds begin to relax, we begin to calm, we begin to come to a place of peace, and the obstacle doesn't change, but we change. And so we'd like to pause at this point in the program and offer you some information about our fellowship and our outreach and activities.
Mike and Iris invite you to be with them every Sunday morning at the magnificent and historic Scottish Rite Cathedral, located at 855 Elm Avenue in Long Beach. Our worship service and Sunday school begin at 11 a.m. Angelus Unity Cathedral Church at the Scottish Rite Cathedral meets in the only true cathedral church located in the city of Long Beach. This magnificent grand building is a true architectural jewel. The service begins at 11 a.m. and there is Sunday school for the children. There is always plenty of free parking in the cathedral lot. Mike and Iris look forward to meeting you and your family this Sunday. People of all faiths are always welcome. We will be saving you a seat this Sunday at Angelus Unity Cathedral Church at the Scottish Rite Cathedral. You will be warmly welcomed.
So this issue of not sleeping, I think, is a big problem for so many, isn't it? Yeah.
It seems to be more and more a problem for people because we're living at this frenetic pace, and most people don't realize that truly we are facing greatest change the world has ever known, and the energies, the very life energies have been stepped up, And if we can realize that, then we don't think, we realize that we're not behind. We're actually working faster, but we have to steady our pace and pace ourselves. And then when we pace ourselves, we don't get tired. We're not nearly as tired. But it's what we expect of life. Life is it's our intent so often. If our intent is to stay calm and peaceful, then we just feel automatically what it is we need to do in order to keep that feeling going. But it's good to be here on Earth at this time. It's a wonderful time to be alive, but it's more difficult because there's more things facing us. And people watch TV and watch the news over and over and over. I would say those people who do watch the news over and over, and the same thing over and over, it distracts their energy level and it gets their energies off balance. And if we read the newspaper and allow it to reach our inner core being, then the same thing happens there. And it's all how we look at life, isn't it?
It is, and it's that issue of fear, it's that issue of busyness, it's that issue of depleting our energies and our vitality. And you touched upon a wonderful point, and that is that if in fact we operate from a center of peace in the midst of these challenging and magnificently wonderful times, we don't get as tired and we're able to accomplish so much more. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to me how people marvel at how certain individuals are able to seemingly always do so much more and not be so exhausted all of the time, and yet others seem to do so little and they're exhausted so much of the time. And a lot of that depletion of our vital energies and our inner core is through this activity of the mind that just wears us down, and the ability that we have to allow fear to rule us, whether it's world conditions or economic situations or fear of losing our jobs or questioning our relationships and all of the rest of it. It's so easy often to get into this negative pattern of thinking and this negative pattern of behaving and this negative pattern of feeling and this negative downward spiral of emotion. And there's no peace there. There's absolutely no peace there. As a matter of fact, we're moving into a place that is not peaceful and is not restful and does not accomplish anything for our great good or for the good of those around us. And so what we want to do is to share with our viewers and our listeners and those who come among us these ideas and concepts that are universal and transcend all of the religious and socioeconomic and faith lines and nationalities and all of the rest, that it doesn't matter who we are. By changing the way that we think about circumstances and situations, we can operate from a place of peace. And when we do, we'll sleep well, we'll be healthier, we will be more prosperous, not only in a material sense, but in terms of the ideas that we have, the guidance that we have, and we'll be able to do so many things and feel so good. Just the other day in church, we were talking about Charles Fillmore, the founder of the Unity Movement, who in his 90s said that he was sizzling with enthusiasm for the things that ought to be done by him. And yet I know people who in their 20s are not sizzling and are not really sizzling with enthusiasm about the things that are to be done by them. And it doesn't matter whether you're Charles Fillmore or Mike Costello or Iris Freelander, who it is. It's true for all of us. And it doesn't matter whether we're 20 or 30 or 90. We want to be able to sizzle with enthusiasm, and we want to have that vitality that we need, and we want to operate from the standpoint of a peaceful place. And when we do, wonderful things will happen.
And it's much easier to accomplish what you just described, that wonderful space to be in, if we cast aside our judgments, and if we cast aside our rigid expectations. We can expect a specific outcome, but we can leave it free-flowing of how we get to that outcome. Because if we try to put everything in just a tightly bound compartment, then it's not going to be easy for us. Life is not going to be easy. And it's like we're fighting ourselves, and we're fighting nature, and we're fighting the energies that pervade throughout the atmosphere. And so if we can just always remember that life is change, it's normal. Life is change, and we can adjust to it. And to keep our consciousness in present time, and of course, we say that almost every time we discuss these confident living topics, because it's so important that we keep our consciousness in present time. If we worry about the past, if we're fretting about the future, then we're not in present time, and we are muddying the waters around us. So we can I would just encourage each person who hears us to look at their own lives and see how they can simplify and how they can keep their consciousness in the present time in a one-pointed way all the time. And that might be easier said than done, and some people might say, well, that's foolish. It isn't.
No, not at all. And we need to let go of judgment, let go of fear. Mm-hmm. And if we do those things, life's great. And yet those are things that, and you put it so well when you said so often we are going counter to that which is natural. Mm-hmm. And because it is natural for us to want and to be and to do all of these wonderful and positive and affirmative things that we talk about. And yet we struggle in the opposite direction, and we fight the obstacles, and we worry and we fret, and we live in the past and we live in the future, and we stay too busy, and we wear ourselves out, and we don't eat right, and we don't exercise, and we don't think right. And then we say, well, why is my life not what it ought to be? Well, it is a process of changing the way that we live our lives within, not outside, but within. And when we change from within, then our lives begin to have substantive change. We spend so much time, or so many people spend time wanting the outside to change. The outside, the external life's not going to change. It's going to change in a positive way. And as you said in the early part of this program, this is a wonderful time to live. Marvelous things are happening. Just the last Sunday, I think, or the Sunday before, in the lecture that I was giving, I was talking about how we have all of these magnificent conveniences that were supposed to make our lives easier, and instead our lives are more complex. And we have all of these things that were supposed to give us more time, and instead we have seemingly less time. And so we're going counter to where the natural process is. And if we would go with the flow, and if we would embrace the reality of this truth, and then we would understand that life is a magnificent and positive experience now and always.
Yes, and allow all those wonderful equipment, all that wonderful equipment to make life easier for us instead of being a slave to it. And that's according to how we look at it. And another thing that creates problems in people's lives and slows them down is fearing death and resisting death of the people that we love. And of course we all grieve, and grief is important. And as you said so well last Sunday in your service, the church service, we're all going to die. And everyone we know and love is going to die. And who knows when each is going to happen. But so many people put too much negative energy into facing death and facing the death of their loved ones. And it might seem heartless and non-realistic for me to sit here and say that we need to accept death as being a natural part of life. But it is, and when we do, then life is so much more beautiful and easy, and we can all just know that. But sometimes people think they're supposed to grieve, they're supposed to fight this death. And when I was a hospice volunteer once, there was a minister who said, the last great enemy is death. And that really I found very irritating, because the last great enemy is not death. Sometimes it's the best friend.
Yes, of all of the obstacles, it is the ultimate obstacle. It is the obstacle that we are preparing for. And that's not to say that we need to be preoccupied with it, but it is to say that it is a normal part of the process of life, and that life, if we believe it's eternal, and we do, that it goes on in a different way. And so it's just one more of the many changes of experience, so one more of the seeming obstacles. And if we're peaceful about it, and again, and very important that we do grieve, that we feel the way that we feel, but once we move through that grieving process, that we understand that it's not something to be feared. It's not something any more than tomorrow is something to be feared, or the future is something to be feared, or economic disaster is something to be feared. You know, so many people believe that if they lose their job, that the world is going to end. And of course, one of the things that is hard for us to understand and grab hold of is that when we lose our job, it simply means that we're needed somewhere else, and that there's another more magnificent job somewhere else for us to do, if we believe in our own abilities and in our own awareness and connection and value. And so we need to operate always from that positive attribute. We open our checkbook and it's empty. It isn't that it's going to stay empty. It is in that time that we can begin to see prosperity and open ourselves to limitless potential that's going to show us new ways to create economic resources. And that's what our message is about. That's what we talk about, and that's what we teach.
Yes, and we have to look at our own life and the life of others and see in a realistic way that whatever is happening can be made for the better, and that it's a normal flow of life.
And as Paul said, all things work together for good, and we believe that, and we know that that's true, and we look forward to great and good and wonderful things happening for you and for us and for all of us. And so we hope that all of this information and all of these concepts have been useful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.